Welcome to the Spanish lesson. The Spanish lesson will teach you about object pronouns. If you think my intro for this Spanish lesson is terrible, now you know what a world without direct and indirect object pronouns would sound like. Pretty awful, right? We've got you covered. In this lesson, we'll show you how to use direct and indirect object pronouns so that your Spanish sounds as fluid as a native speaker. So let's dive in. Knowing how to use object pronouns is crucial to upgrade your Spanish from sounding like a 5-year-old to a much more competent Spanish speaker. Of course, if your goal is speaking Spanish, make sure to check out BaseLang.com where you can get access to unlimited one-on-one Spanish classes with native speaking teachers all via Zoom. Now let's start with some basic definitions. When I say object pronoun, what I'm referring to is a word that replaces an object in a sentence. So for example, if you see your friend and they ask you, "Do you like my shirt?" Your response would probably be like, "Yeah, I like it." In that response, the word "it" is the object pronoun. Without the use of an object pronoun, your answer would be, "Yeah, I like that shirt," which sounds a lot more formal and a little robotic. So, now that we've covered what an object pronoun is, our next question is, what's the difference between a direct and indirect object pronoun? What is a direct object pronoun? In a sentence, the object that receives the action of the verb is known as the direct object. If the direct object is inanimate, like a person or an animal, then you can easily identify the direct object pronoun by looking at the noun that follows a or al. Let's take a look at some examples. And remember, feel free to pause the video or cycle back if you need extra time to understand this concept. And of course, you can also check out our in-depth article on object pronouns by clicking the link in the description below. Our first example. Estoy llamando a mis padres. I'm calling my parents. So the direct object is mis padres. If you wanted to say that sentence using a direct object pronoun instead, you'd say, estoy llamándolos. I'm calling them. Make sense? Let's take a look at another example. Ella está alimentando a su hijo. She is feeding her son. Using the correct direct object pronoun, this sentence turns into, ella está alimentándolo. She is feeding him. Those were some simple examples, but the direct object pronoun may not always be that obvious, especially when it doesn't involve an animate object. In general, the easiest way to find the direct object is simply by asking who or what is receiving the action of the verb. And typically, this will be the noun that immediately follows the action verb. For example, yo leo el libro cada noche antes de ir a la cama. I read the book every night before going to bed. That sentence doesn't include an animated object, but the main action is to read. And if reading is the main action, then you can ask, well, what do you read? The answer is pretty obvious. The book. So then, the book is what we need to replace with a direct object pronoun, and that looks like this. Lo leo cada noche antes de ir a la cama. I read it every night before going to bed. Let's look at a few more examples. No puedo recordar la casa. I can't remember the house. Using a direct object pronoun, this turns into no puedo recordarla. I can't remember it. Or, tú tienes que escribir la carta. You have to write the letter. With a direct object pronoun, instead, that sentence becomes tienes que escribirla, which means you have to write it. Now that you get the gist of it, let's take a look at how direct object pronouns work with every personal pronoun. Direct object pronouns. Yo, me, tú, te, usted, lo, la, él, ella, lo, la, nosotros, nos, ustedes, los, las, ellos, ellas, los, las. And there you have it. Pretty simple. And remember, there's a link to our article on object pronouns in the description below, where you can find this chart along with some exercises and examples to review. For now, let's look at a few more examples. Ellos me ayudan con mi trabajo. They help me with my work. Ana te recuerda con cariño. Ana remembers you with love. Ustedes la esperan? You wait for her. Got it? Great. Before we move on, make sure you've subscribed to BaseLang, where we give you awesome lessons each week to help you master Spanish. Now, let's move on to the indirect object pronouns. Indirect object pronouns. So, your next question is probably, what's the difference between a direct and indirect object pronoun? As we just covered, a direct object is whoever or whatever is receiving the action of the verb. On the other hand, an indirect object pronoun is whom or to whom the action is being done for. Let's see if you can figure it out. In the following sentence, see if you can identify the direct and indirect object pronoun. Yo lavo el carro para mi tío. I wash the car for my uncle. All right, I won't keep you in suspense. The who, what receiving the action of the verb is the car. This makes the car our direct object. And the whom to whom the action is being done for is my uncle, my tío, which makes him the indirect object. So, using an indirect object pronoun, that same sentence turns into Yo le lavo el carro. I wash the car for him. Let's take a look at a couple more examples of indirect pronouns for good measure. ¿Me puedes hacer la cena? Can you make dinner for me? In that sentence, the indirect object pronoun is me. Here's another. Él siempre le compra flores. He always buys her flowers. In that one, the indirect object pronoun is le. And now, let's take a look at how indirect object pronouns work with every personal pronoun. Indirect object pronouns. Yo, me, tú, te, usted, le, él, ella, le, nosotros, nos, ustedes, les, ellos, ellas, les. So now that we know the difference between direct and indirect pronouns, as well as how to use them, let's see how to use them in the same sentence. Using direct and indirect pronouns in the same sentence. As a rule, the indirect object pronoun is always placed before the direct object pronoun. Let's look at a few examples. Yo te lo compro. I buy it for you. In that example, te is the indirect object pronoun and lo is the direct object pronoun. Make sense? Let's take a look at a couple more. Él nos lo compra. He buys it for us. Ellos me lo compran. They buy it for me. Pretty straightforward. There's a second rule you should also remember when direct and indirect pronouns are used in the same sentence. When both the indirect and direct pronouns begin with the letter L, you change the indirect pronoun, which is the one that comes first, to se. So, in other words, the indirect pronouns le and les will always change to se when accompanied in the same sentence by the direct pronouns lo, las, los, or las. The reason for this is purely phonetic. It just sounds smoother. Let's take a look at a couple examples to see this in action. Él compra el juguete a su hija. He buys the toy for his daughter. In that sentence, the direct object is the toy and the indirect object is his daughter. So, using direct and indirect pronouns, this turns into él se lo compra. He buys it for her. Pretty simple. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. Yo puedo cocinar cena para ti esta noche, which means I can cook dinner for you tonight. Using direct and indirect pronouns, this turns into yo te la puedo cocinar esta noche. I can cook it for you tonight. Or, nosotros estamos enseñando la lección a los estudiantes. We are teaching the lesson to the students. Here's the same sentence using direct and indirect pronouns. Nosotros se la estamos enseñando. We are teaching it to them. And there it is, everything you need to know to start using direct and indirect object pronouns. If you want to practice this concept with a live teacher, why not head over to baselang.com and schedule your first class today? At BaseLang, you get access to unlimited one-on-one Spanish classes with native-speaking teachers, all via Zoom. Try your first week for only $1. For more lessons on Spanish grammar, check out our playlist right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.